Please welcome Baltimore City Food Policy Director, Holly Freistadt, founder of Keep Growing Detroit, Ashley Atkinson, DC Food Policy Director, Lane Sidlowski, founder of Maryland Hunger Solutions, Michael Wilson, and panel moderator, Kathleen Merrigan.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you. Well, so much to talk about. I've heard so many great things today, but our job as a panel, and it's not an easy one, is to sort of think big picture. Take a couple of steps back, do the 10,000-foot view from where you're situated and the work that you're doing around urban agriculture. So Holly, let's start with you. I have toured around Baltimore with the mayor and yourself. We've had some great times with Mayor Rawlings Blake and some exciting stuff going on.
So I'm part of the Baltimore Food Policy Initiative, and there's so many things I can say. But with my slot, I'm going to talk about urban agriculture solely here. I'm in the Office of Sustainability, and in our sustainability plan, we have a goal to increase production for urban agriculture. So one of our goals. And what we've done, and we also have an urban ag plan, which I don't know how many cities have urban ag plans. So this is something that we're really looking at. In the last 6 years, we have 17 urban farms, 50 hoop houses, which 6 years ago we weren't allowed to have hoop houses in the city. We have a farm alliance, a farmer co-op, and the landscape of agriculture is really changing. And so our role as a city is really changing as well. So we've done quite a bit on the legislative side. We have an urban ag tax credit for real property on private land for farmers. We have a land leasing initiative for city-owned land for farmers to have 5-year lease agreements. We have water rights for around $100. I can't remember how much it was, around $100 for the farmers. And we're really trying to make it a place where farming can happen in the city. So that's a quick landscape of what farming looks like. But what happens in a city is so different than what happens rurally. And our role of farmers is different. So we first started out, let's see how many for-profit farms we could get. And that was the goal. Let's have this land leasing initiative. Let's see about for-profit farms. And we have realized the role of nonprofit farms and why they are so important in our city. They are taking vacant land and they're giving jobs to returning citizens to grow food. And when we think about urban farming and the Farm Bill, yes, we want to see profit. Yes, we want to see green space, food production, food access. But we also want to see the place for the nonprofit farm, which we may not want to see anywhere else except in cities, because we don't want to compete with the farmer rurally. But we do need to see this movement of growing farmers, and it may need to come through some nonprofits. So that's a quick glimpse of what it looks like in Baltimore City and a little bit of what the landscape is. And the other piece, a very new body of work, is food resiliency. We have a food resiliency plan getting released in 2017. And this all started back with the civil unrest in Baltimore and then Jonas and the role of emergency food and the city's role in coordinating communication and making sure that food is being grown and also making sure food is moving to the areas that's needed. And so we're really looking at food as basic infrastructure, and farming is a part of that. And I don't know how much language we're really talking about in the Farm Bill around food resiliency. But cities are looking at it, and we need to make sure we're building it into the Farm Bill.
So for all those farmers out there in rural America who might be wondering, what's all this about? It's a big tent, but is there still going to be a lot of room for me? You're basically reiterating what we heard on a previous panel. It's mission, not competition, and that there's a complementarity here that you're seeing in your work.
We're talking 5 acres. 17 farms, 5 acres, we're not competing. But we could potentially build farmers, and we can build a conversation about produce and many types of food. So we're not going to compete. But we could make urban agriculture a part of the farming spectrum.
And you've seen this real growth over the time that you've been working in the city.
We've seen this real growth, but I think it can only grow so far if we don't have other policies and wraparound services to it.
Okay, great. Actually, tell us a little bit about your worldview here on urban ag.
Great, I'd love to. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Atkinson, and I'm a co-director at Keep Growing Detroit, where our mission is to promote a food sovereign city where the majority of fruits and vegetables that Detroiters consume are grown by residents for residents within the city's limits. So it's quite an audacious, but actually feasible mission that we have. And we approach it through providing resources and support to a network of over 1,400 gardens and farms in the city that serve nearly 20,000 residents. And pairing all those resources with education and community events, as well as we sponsor a Little C Growers Cooperative, where between 60 and 100 growers collaborate to aggregate produce and get it out to community markets and to local restaurants. So I guess, one thing that I can contribute to the conversation, I've been in the field for 20 years now, since I was 19. So for those of you in college wondering kind of, what the trajectory looks like, come and see me later. I have been out of the loop with a lack of kind of representation with urban agriculture and the greater kind of agricultural and food systems conversation. And I'm really glad that it's starting to shift and we're starting to see these opportunities opening up. But I'd really like to offer a reframing of the conversation. I feel like what we've talked about today is what urban agriculture will now get out of the Farm Bill, or could potentially get out of the revisions in the Farm Bill. And I think we also need to talk about what urban agriculture can contribute to agriculture in this country. Particularly, urban agriculture is really, really fertile ground to create the kind of regenerative systems and relationships that are going to be so integral in making our food system more resilient. I also believe that there are plenty of opportunities to create fertile ground to have conversations about race, structural racism, and how we not only kind of learn the history and the consequence, but also have conversations about how to redesign our communities so that there's less structural racism present in our communities. I'd also like to, just have a short conversation about the potential to open up some kind of undue burdens or unfair burdens with urban agriculture in the Act. There's some language related to soil testing and remediation that's, frankly, not a standard that larger commercial agriculture has to even consider. And there are some benefits to larger urban agriculture, some subsidies for planting things like cover crops that are practices most urban agricultural groups that I work with, practice sustainable agriculture. So there should be some, possibly monetary benefits, which there are included in the bill, to be considered for urban ag. So just kind of offering a little bit of a reframing. I think urban agriculture has a lot to add to the conversation and to the practice.
So I've spent some time visiting some of the urban farms in Detroit. It's really impressive. And there's real empowerment, taking back the community, taking back abandoned or unused property. It's really very impressive. To what extent do you still have a lot of land yet to tap for urban agriculture? How far has this permeated Detroit?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So right now, those 1,400 gardens and farms are on just under 200 acres. To give you an idea about how much vacant land there is in the city, I think some of my colleagues earlier said, we have nearly 30 square miles of vacant land in the city. Our vision of where the majority of fruits and vegetables are grown in the city would take about 5,000 acres using the same practices that we're teaching every single day to the growers that we serve. And so we're talking about between 20 and 25% of the vacant land that already exists today to be put to use to grow places, to have places to grow food in every neighborhood. And really not only increase food access, food security, health, nutrition, social relationships, but also, as we know from our history, urban gardens and farms are really amazing community and economic development tools.
Great. So big picture, I'm hearing from you, remember urban ag has a lot to give.
It does.
It's not just take, it's give. And that it's a lot about community. And the structural racism, the empowerment, very exciting what's going on in your city. Okay, so there's this big movement across the country for food policy councils. Started, I think, in Hartford, Connecticut, but booming. It's a booming business. And now our nation's capital has a Food Policy Council. Tell us what's going on.
So, hello everyone, I'm Lane Sadlowski. I'm the Food Policy Director for Washington, D.C. My position was created to help assist us put forward our first Food Policy Council, and we just started meeting at our first meeting in August. And the idea is for us to act as this collaborative go-between between all of the different nonprofit groups in urban agriculture and other food systems issues with the government and make sure that our policies actually align with each other, which is important for DC because we have a lot of urban agriculture for a city this small. We have more than 50 community gardens. We have 9 commercial or nonprofit sort of full-scale farms, so they're not just community gardening. So in total, that doesn't make up a lot of land area. It's a total of almost 27 acres and growing, so woo. Our goal is to double that over the next 20 years, which is pretty audacious for us as well, although obviously we're not operating on the same scale. But land values are so high in Washington, D.C. that is a huge barrier, and it's something that the other panels discussed earlier today for just the start of the bottom line to move into productive agriculture in the city. So some things that we're thinking about when it comes to thinking about the new farm bill are thinking about that extra support for farmer startup costs. That's really critical. We hear that all the time from farmers. We hear from people starting aquaponics or indoor farming that it's just really, really hard to overcome the high cost of rent to make a feasible bottom line. Some assistance for those things to help with land acquisition, to help with capital costs is really going to be critical, I think, for farmers who are especially operating in a sort of high value growing city. So we have like the sort of two ends of the spectrum. You have cities that are shrinking and cities that are growing, and they need vastly different things. And I think there are pieces of both of those in the Farm Bill. But I did also want to reiterate something that we heard several times today, is that big agriculture is not the enemy here. And this is not, urban agriculture is not designed to put big agriculture out of business. We completely depend on them. We are consumers in the urban environment, and our local urban farms are amazing teaching tools. They're amazing to connect people to the larger ecosystem, to connect people to their food, and they really have that value to make people think through the interaction with how they fit into the larger system. But at 26 total acres in the city and close to 700,000 people, we are never going to be able to feed the entire city sheerly, even if we took all the rooftops in the city and put them under agricultural production. We're just not operating at that scale, but they do play a really critical role. And part of the reason that it's so important for us to have these sort of teaching examples, to have these community building spaces, and also to grow some food locally for our own food, ecological footprint, is because of the issues that Holly mentioned before, resilience and food security. In case of emergency, we are, the nation's capital. It's something we always have to sort of think about. We have about a 3-day supply of food in the city at any given time. That's not very much. And we've seen consequences of that during some of the big snow events, because everybody knows in DC we just don't know how to deal with snow. But that's snow. What if there was a real emergency? We can all sort of handle snow. So I think it is something that's important for us to think through regional food systems and really getting tied to the surrounding areas in a much stronger way, making sure that we as an urban center are protecting and helping to advocate for our surrounding regional areas to protect their farmland, and making sure that our value chains are getting set up in a much more connected way than I think we've done discernibly before. So we have a sort of onus to support and grow our urban agriculture, but also to support and grow the suburban agriculture that's surrounding us, because we depend on them entirely to sort of make it. I did want to throw in one last little point. I know you said you'd be very strict on time, but around food waste. We did have a small mention of composting, which is an important step forward, and it's come up several times today. But I think food waste, food recovery is really a missing piece of this conversation. A lot of cities are working on this issue. A lot of urban and suburban areas are starting to think through what that means, whether it's donations from farmers or working with food banks. But there's a huge spectrum of things that we can be doing, and I think it needs to be integrated into our plans for urban agriculture.
Great. Well, food waste, yes, should be on the agenda. We all should be thinking about that. There's a lot of activity by our government, by the European Parliament, it's embedded in the Sustainable Development Goals. The Food Agricultural Organization, the UN, is working on food waste. In fact, I just saw something, the Beef Checkoff program has a food waste challenge ongoing now. So it's part of all of the conversations I go to now when I go to agricultural-related events. So I appreciate, Lane, for you bringing that up. And one of the things I think about, here we have 3 cities that are on the map, so to speak, in urban ag: Baltimore, Detroit, DC. And you guys have talked about the actual acreage. So it just harkens back, for our colleagues out in rural communities, we appreciate you. We really do, and we celebrate what you do. And one of the speakers, one of the panels earlier said, our farmers learn from the rural farmers, and this is a conversation that's bigger than about just food. Not that food's just food. I don't mean to say it that way, but right. Maybe just food in the sense of social equity and access, which leads right in to you, my friend.
Okay.
We've got a lot of people still struggling, even though the economy is doing better than it was a few years ago. We see our numbers going down in terms of participation
right.
in the SNAP program, the food stamp program.
Right.
But from your vantage point, big picture, what are you thinking?
So when I think about the big picture from the perspective of Maryland Hunger Solutions, I come from a perspective as an advocate. So I worked on Capitol Hill for an urban member of Congress from Chicago. I worked in the Labor Department working on regulations and policy. I worked as a legislative and political director for a union representing food workers. So I think about policy here very, very clearly. And so when I think about the Farm Bill and what things we're going to try to get accomplished, I would say we have to tell what you're doing, whether it's your aquaponics, it's the urban, all the projects that are going on around the country. I think it's an impressive array, and that has to be communicated. We also have to tell the stories related to that about how we get there. We also have to tie it into the broader movements, because that's what really influences potentially members of Congress and the way they work. So it's the consumer movement, it's farmers from around the country, but it's also the civil rights movement that has a real role here. It's the women's movement, which has a role here as well. It's the welfare rights movement, which is a part of what we've always done, because the anti-hunger work that we do is clearly connected to anti-poverty work. So Maryland is, by per capita income, the wealthiest state in the country, or as we like to say, it's the wealthiest state in the wealthiest country in the history of the universe. And we've got 5.7 million residents, but we've got over 700,000 people who use food stamps. So we have this great poverty, we have this great wealth, we have this dichotomy, and we're trying to address it all the time. So one of the things we do, obviously, is we sign people up for food stamps whenever they're eligible. We also train other nonprofit groups, whether they're local food policy groups like the Prince George's Food Equity Council or the Baltimore County Food Policy Council, or whether it's a church or a pantry. We're always looking to use those facilities. But we also want to connect people to food whenever we can. So we were the pioneers, so to speak, in Maryland, connecting food stamp recipients to the farmers markets. We've got over 500 farmers markets in a state like Maryland, which is a big number. And we're trying to get more of them connected. But we want people to be able to utilize those programs as well whenever as possible. And so there's a lot of connections that still need to be made. And the policy that we always talk about is connecting hunger and anti-poverty, because that's the strain that we work in to try to make a change all the time.
One of the things that I know from USDA's Economic Research Service, some of the research that they do, they look at what people really eat.
Right.
And one of the things I always like to share with conferences and conversation is that we know that people who are low income and people who are moderate income, middle class, I guess, they're making some of the same food choices,
right.
And they're not all good, by the way.
No, that's exactly
but
right.
the point is that it's about food access.
Yes.
And urban ag can play a role there.
Right.
I think is what I'm thinking. But it's not that we can't all appreciate a locally grown, fresh tomato, if we can get one.
If we can get one. And there's always the challenge of, it's not what I'm eating, it's what that person over there is eating. How dare they buy that with my tax dollars? And that's the stigma that we're always dealing with in reality, when we know that everybody does those things.
Yeah, yeah. All right, now, I'm going to go right to questions. I can keep asking these panelists questions, but I'm going to give it to you, and well, they're already up there. Okay, then. So I'm going to go for the top one here. In a city where land is incredibly scarce and expensive, New York City, San Francisco, how might an urban ag operation, I suppose, still be expansive and successful? Price point. The question is about price point. Anyone who wants to take that.
I mean, I'll jump in. We have an urban agriculture bill in DC right now that's designed for us to make city land available for urban agriculture, because we have a goal for it as part of our sustainability plan. We have, hopes that we will have better access to locally grown food in the city. But there are complications that come with that. The act's being amended right now. It's tricky still for us as a city to find land and make it available. But I think the short answer is, if the city really wants to prioritize it, they'll make it technically easy for people to open and start farms. They won't have a really onerous application process or soil testing process. They'll provide technical support to people who want to do these things. And really, in the land sort of squeezed area, they'll provide land or rooftops. It doesn't just have to be land. Maybe we have spare warehouses that we should also be looking at, as opposed to just nice non-contaminated land that happens to not be shady and have access to water and is metro accessible, because then the pool gets much smaller. So we need to think a little more creatively, in the same way that entrepreneurs are willing to think creatively about what might be a good fit for urban agriculture.
We had a GW Business School competition here last year, and some of the students who won, the team, they're doing containers, like the dump truck, those kind of big metal containers. They're doing gardening in there, farming, and it's very interesting. To your point, yeah, Michael.
I want to touch on, because in some ways these borders are not real.
Right.
There are a lot of DC consumers who actually shop in Montgomery County, Maryland, because there are more stores dealing with the food desert issue. It's also true that you can be a Virginia resident, get on the metro, go through DC, buy groceries in Montgomery County with your food stamp benefits, and go back and never go back. So the competition here is broader than that. We need to think about beyond borders as well, because DC residents can buy food anywhere in the region. It is the DMV.
Yeah, they do.
I'm going to go to the next question, and this is, I like to not have everyone answer every question, but this one you all have to answer, okay? So where do you see urban ag in 25 years? That's a perfect question for this panoramic panel vision. Holly, starting with you.
I think that Detroit, you have it right in this area, that everyone should be able to grow their own food, or not everyone wants to, but if everyone could grow their own food or access the food that they want. So agriculture is a part of a city landscape. So there's urban farmers, there's community gardens, there's school gardens. That food is just everywhere. And that we build a system and we plan a city based and include agriculture in many different spectrums as a part of it. So I would say that, in addition to that, not being too city-centric, which is where I tend to lay, is making sure that we build policies working with our counties and our rural areas, because we are dependent on the food supply of not just our region, but globally. And so in our systems and policies, we really need to be looking at the county, the tri-state area, and beyond, and making sure that they're all interrelated, related to agriculture.
Yeah. I agree. I think that there should be places to grow food in every neighborhood. And when my mom still to this day kind of scratches her head and says, like, what do you do? Like, what is it? I remind her that there was a day once long ago when then people had the same reaction to parks. Like, here's this great idea. Let's have this green open space where it's open and accessible to everyone and people can come together. And I really hope that in 20 years it's just as kind of duh. Of course there should be places to grow food wherever there are people, because we know the benefits are so so important. And I'll just put a plug out there, especially to really, really young children. So we work hard to get a lot of gardens built in early childhood centers, because a lot of fruit and vegetable behaviors are established by age 3. So you can imagine just like a simple container like the one you were talking about on a paved lot would have an enormous effect on somebody who's just developing their kind of view of the world, in particular their view of and relationship with healthy food.
So it's always sort of boring when everyone agrees, but totally agree. I would envision a future where every kid in elementary school and preschool has mandatory education about the food system as part of their science lessons, that they all have access to gardens, no matter the sort of size and space, because we've proved we can grow on roofs or indoors, at least on the small scale, that everyone should learn that basic science and connection to food and how to cook with it the same way, we used to have home ec, that everybody needs to know some basic things about the world, and that should be included in it. I also would see that in the future, what my hope would be is that we can use urban areas as this sort of working ground of innovation around agriculture and education, around learning about agricultural systems, and that some of those very same people who learn about these things growing up in our urban centers will then go out and help repopulate and resupport economic development in rural areas. They'll take over those farms and help to build a system that's more regionally connected in the long term. So I think 20 years out, we have all the tools of what we need. We have this changing rapid technology of vertical farming and how to be more efficient with our water and our nutrient use when it comes to farming. We're just going to get better at this as we go on, and I think we can have a better large-scale system, not just in the cities.
So I'm not going to disagree, but I'm going to go in a different direction. I think the goal ought to be ending hunger in 20 years. We need to think Star Trek, right? Where nobody has to worry about hunger. We can't get there just depending on North Dakota and Kansas to grow our food. We need urban agriculture to be a big part of that. And if we use all of these different strains and use urban agriculture as well, we can end hunger, and that's really a goal that we should all aspire to.
Oh, great. Well, I'm going to add to this. I know I'm just supposed to be the questioner, but I'll tell you this story. I started a garden-based curriculum program at Quincy Elementary School up in Chinatown in Boston, where 80% of the children come from families below the poverty line, and I can't even remember how many different first languages the teachers were coping with. Anyhow, I raised funds we did garden-based learning stuff there, and we had a garden, and we did the rooftop stuff, and we did grow labs. But once a year, we would raise the funds, and my graduate students and I would bring the kids out to Drumlin Farm, which is an educational farm that the Audubon Society has. And the first time we did this, I was so proud, because I thought, my goodness, for most of these kids, they've probably never been to a farm before. And we're really excited, and we got them all on the bus. And then I learned something that I'll never forget. The kids are so excited because they never saw a highway before. Oh, wow. So it was jolting for me, right? So again, that connection that we need to make for young people in a city environment about where food's grown, how it's produced, who produced it, to me is we need to move many, many miles from where we are now. So my vision in 25 years is I won't be talking about this anymore. So let me see. Has there been interest in investing in urban ag from the larger scale agriculture? Is there a way to integrate them more, since they have so much power in Congress? I think we have power too. I mean, you all have power, but okay. Let's say, how do we bring this together? How do we make it a round table and everyone's seated at the table? Aha, hey, come on, you worked on the Hill. You put out all those political credentials.
Okay. So there's plenty of money. There's plenty of money to do the things that Senator Stabenow wants to do in her bill and the Farm Bill. 80% of the funds of the Farm Bill last time was food stamps. Only 20% was not. There's plenty of money to do the things we need to do if we can all agree that those are the priorities that the nation ought to do. And we ought to not talk about cutting other folks. Let's talk about building up all the things that a farm and food bill, thank you, Holly, a farm and food bill really ought to do for everybody in the country.
I would also throw out there that I was at the New York Times Future of Food conference last week, and Kimball Musk, Elon Musk's brother, was there talking about his new vertical farm operation that he is starting to pilot in several locations in Brooklyn. So I say if the Musk brothers are all in on urban agriculture, I think Big Ag won't be far behind.
Yeah, just two things I want to remind everybody that urban agriculture does for our food system. One is the majority of America's population lives in cities, and urban agriculture helps them reconnect to food, build relationships with food, so they understand seasonality, understand local, are willing to try new things. We're farmers' best friends if they really want to market a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. The other thing is we have in cities a number of really amazing apprenticeships and training programs, and many of the apprentices and folks that we've trained over the years have actually gone out into rural and peri-urban areas and purchased land and begun farming. And so we're contributing to the turn that really I think everybody acknowledges that needs to be done, which is there needs to be more people growing food. It's just smart and important for our national security. And the age and diversity of the people that are responsible for our food system and benefit from our food system needs to change.
So I know our next speaker is here, and we're anxious to hear from Amber Tuska. So I'm going to ask one last wrap-up question. And by the way, all these questions that are coming throughout the day, we're going to collect them all. We're going to find ways to answer and address them on our website. None of them are easy. None of them have just one answer. But part of what we're trying to do today is to help generate the kind of conversations that move the ball forward. So I really like this question. What can an average citizen not working in the field of urban ag, how can they support this?
I think one is spending your money. Spend your money, whether it's at a farmer's market or whether it's even at a grocery store, trying to support local foods and our local farmers. I think that we need to continue to support farming. And we can do that in so many different ways, whether it's our job or whether how we spend our money, or whether it's how we talk about it, or whether we're teaching our kids about it. And it's one of the things I feel like I do the most in the city is making sure that every agency and every organization is thinking about food. Because when transportation is making decisions, they're not thinking food. They're thinking about transportation. And so I think the answer as a citizen is, how do you become a food citizen? How are you thinking about food in the non-obvious ways? We think about food when we're in the supermarket, but what about the other times? And that would be really changing your landscape of how you think about food and when you think about it.
I love that. Anyone want to add?
I'll just say, Malik said earlier, land security is extremely important for folks that are doing gardening and farming. And so there's two bits to support more land security for a wider array of people that are more representative of our country and the future of our country. One is to be in dialogue in your cities and towns about making a permanent role for urban agriculture in the landscape. So selling land, making land available for urban gardens and farms. And the other is just supporting however you can land rights of indigenous and other communities of color.
Great.
Well, I think we all have to participate in the economy and do that to the benefit of farmers and urban ag as well. But we also have to participate in the civil society. So yes, that means voting, but it means more than voting. It means also talking to candidates about these kinds of issues. When an urban dweller says to their member of Congress, I'm interested in this, it changes the dynamic. And so every average citizen has a right and an ability to both to vote and to participate in the conversation.
Lane, you've got the last word of our panel.
Oh boy, no pressure. I know. I think, you know, your elected officials, they listen to you all. If you all say, we want you to permanently protect land for urban farming in DC or in the surrounding areas, and there are enough of you and you speak loudly and longly, the squeaky wheel does get the grease. If we say that this is a priority, we put our money behind it, we purchase from it as government or as large institutions, we have the power with our decisions and with our funding to move government, to move these large entities who make those larger decisions about what our priorities are. So we're the ones who all collectively can make that impact, and you can do it with your dollars, you can do it with your voice, you can do it with your conversations with elected officials, but you've got to do it. Don't just think about it, actually do it.
Great. Well, panel, thank you very much.